This is one of the soil feeding stations from one of my planters, and you can see here there's a few worms actually still in here, and I'll just empty this out, which is easier said than done. When I made this one, it's quite small diameter, and I realised it's much easier if you make this larger diameter. So the idea was you could push that through. It won't now. Yeah, so that's just for size comparison. There's a can. So that's actually the diameter of a can, and it's about one and a third, well, 1 1/3 cans tall. So quite small, but that's just a little bit of mesh. But what you can see here, there's about 3 or 4 nice big worms, and some of the worms actually fell off the side. We've got a few composting worms in here, and this material here is really nice fine castings, and these worms are sticking in my hand. So you can see that's really nice stuff. But put those down, stop disturbing those. But this stuff is brilliant because you can just sift this over the top of the soil just before it's going to rain, and that really rejuvenates plants super quick. Almost like in a week you already notice big differences with that. So the idea was the planter, you had a planter with a soil feeding station inside it, and then you could just take bananas, apple cores, all your kind of kitchen waste, a paper towel, and stick it in there, and then in the same container you're getting the kind of fresh compost or the casts to replenish that soil as well. So what I'm going to do in this one, I'm going to just top dress some of my green roof with this material, and then the rain will work that down, and then the worms will just go into that green roof as well, and they'll breed. But what I'd recommend is if the containers are around about a foot square, maybe 120, just over 100 millimeters, so you can get your hand right in there. It makes it much easier to harvest. And with the surface area as well, if you double the diameter of that, the surface area goes up, well, not by the square, but it goes up much dramatically. So something like that would be 3 times the surface area, as opposed to, I don't know, maybe twice the diameter or whatever. But off the top of my head, I'm not very good at doing the maths, but I can always post that in the comments as well. But this stuff is absolutely superb, and it's so easy to use because you don't have to sift it. You can just brush it through your fingers, and then top dress your plants, and then they'll just green up within a couple of weeks easily. So that's a very short video. Soil feeding stations, really easy to use, and a terrific demonstration. I mean, this one, that was just the soil feeding station. That's been out of the container for months, and you've still got 4 or 5 big worms, and then all the ones around the outside as well. And that hadn't. The only thing is about soil feeding stations is if you put this in a container of compost all around it, you're not going to get worm casts in here when you're finished. You're going to get a mix of that compost and nutrients from all that organic matter that's broken down, but the worms will circulate this all round. They don't keep it enclosed into that space. When I first started doing this, I almost imagined that the level in here would reduce down and you'd end up with worm castings, but it's just you're replenishing the planter, but then you're also using this to harvest from as well, so you're not disturbing all the plant roots or whatever that's growing in there, or the perennial sort of planting. But yeah, you're not gonna, it's a homogeneous material. It's not just, it doesn't just stay in there. And one thing about, if you want to actually produce castings, this isn't necessarily the way to go, because a lot of the percentage of that cast is being used in that container. But really, this is an excellent way of providing a habitat for worms, but also this is my thought process here. But yeah, what you're doing is you're providing the habitat, and this is almost like a way of getting rid of disposing of green material and waste. So it's a very simple process to actually use, because you're just actually literally chucking material in, and you don't have so many problems with overfeeding, and you don't have so many problems with dealing with leachate, because there's a drainage system here There's also irrigation, so the leachate is being used up by the surrounding plants. And if you think naturally, you'll get a layer of leaf litter and fruit and items that fall down on here. And obviously in an actual ecosystem, you'd have mammals and things would be consuming that, and then their feces would be feeding the soil, but you'd have a sort of layer of wet, breaking down, decomposing matter in the soil. And that's not a problem with excess leachate, because you're not putting huge volumes of material into a small system. You've got enough plant life to actually kind of use up that nitrate and those sort of any leachate at the same time, and then the roots are obviously going down and they're taking out moisture, so you've got air and moisture exchange through the soil and through the air spaces in the soil. And I think some of the forum members on the WC UK as well, especially where they've got dog waste composting bins, I think if you can kind of look at that, maybe a container or whatever sort of thing, if you go on the outside, maybe add the same volume again as a sort of buffer zone with compost and green manure. Any potential leachate that washes through, that will be dealt with by those plants. And then if you've got a system where that level is reducing down, if you can harvest those plants as well, so you're not growing green manures and ploughing all that root material into the compost, you're harvesting the green nitrogenous top layer and then putting that back in. So then that's more of a balanced sort of system in terms of what you're feeding. It's not just purely dog waste and cardboard and wood shavings. You've got that green material that's going on there as well, and then you've got all that root zone, and then you've got all potential for the sort of mycorrhizal fungi and making a more of an ecosystem. I think if you can get something where you're maintaining or consuming all that irrigation, or consuming the washout and run through and leachate, then you've got quite a nice balanced system. And I think if just purely from sort of observing how much of the organic matter around these systems is improved by having soil feeding stations, a sort of rule of thumb, I think if you've got a container, if you can make the surface area of the feed of the soil feeding station maybe about half the volume of what's going on around the outside, then those plants are going to benefit from that organic matter. The organic matter is going to benefit from the plants because it's dealing with controlling all the moisture levels and things like that. I think if you can use lots of cardboard and things, if you can mix some green waste and some fast composting green waste like comfrey leaves and clovers and alfalfa and things, I think that's a really good system. And if you're growing in these sort of, what do you call it, sort of almost like perpetual sort of planting in the same container, so you're not repotting every I don't know, year or every season, you're just keeping this thing kind of topped up. I think it's quite nice if you can just take some of that castings and just top dress as well, because then whether I'm using things like green lids on these systems, that material, one thing, because you've got so much worm activity underneath in the feeding stations and things, any organic matter on top is going to kind of tend to work through, and the level's going to sort of reduce down over the whole thing. So it's quite nice if you take some of that cast and you can replenish what's lost. And also what I'm tending to try out now is taking smaller diameter sort of branches and prunings, and actually using those to build up some soil structure in the surface of the soil, and then top dress with worm casts as well. Obviously, if you've got loads of fine wood chip that's shredded and mixed into the compost, that wood chip's going to take out nitrogen from the planting substrate. But if you've got just a chunk of wood, it's only the outside layer where there's going to be the interaction between the surrounding sort of compost. So it's only maybe 5-10 millimeters around that, but then you've got all the potential for absorbing rainwater, taking up water, making that moisture available. And then because you've got more of an interaction between worms and things in terms of breaking that material down the wood lice, they're obviously adding more material than what that bit of wood is taking from the soil. So I'm not saying, oh, get loads of wood chip and mix that all into your compost, because then you're not going to get any plants, and you're going to see they're suffering. The leaves are going to be yellow because they're going to be deficient in nitrogen and all the sort of micro sort of nutrients that they'll need in the soil. But if you can have that as a chunk of wood, and not like have a whole log and then a little bit of compost on top, because you're not going to grow much, because there isn't actually much volume of compost in there. But if you can have like maybe just around the outside, so you think, yeah, you're creating these conditions for the wood to break down, And in my own sort of experiments where I've had reservoirs with logs and things standing in that material, those logs break down really quite quickly, because they are using capillary action to actually absorb all that moisture from the planter. But then if you combine that with planting around the outside, then those plants are benefiting from that wood being used like a giant sort of wicking kind of tube or a wicking cylinder as well. So it's interesting, but you can see this is like, look at these worms, brilliant. That's just such nice material, and that was just a little bit of wire like that, and obviously if that was larger diameter. And what is nice as well, the worm casts really hold the moisture. So if you imagine a planter, so say the planter is the size of this sort of seed tray, more worms, yeah, you can make that sort of volume, and then that's sort of 50% of the actual area, and then there's enough material going back, and then there's a good growing space as well. So you wouldn't have the whole thing and a little tiny thin bit around the edge for the plants. You'd have a big chunk of compost for the plants and a big chunk for soil feeding stations. But if you had that combined with a capillary wicking cylinder, then all that this is so nice. You can just feel it, and it's cool to the touch. It's just perfect kind of in terms of being too wet or too dry. And you can see with this stuff it compacts down a bit like clay, but then it just breaks up again. So that's a really nice cast. And what you can see, I don't know how well it's going to show up on the camera, but if you look closely, you can see worm casts. It looks like little round sort of little nodules, little balls, and that is actually where it's being pooped out by the worms. And there's little tiny little bits of grit and things in there, and that's probably from the horticultural grit that I used, that the worms are moving that material around. But yeah, just goes to show, a little tiny bit of waste material, and then it makes a brilliant little micro habitat inside a bigger container. And I'm really enjoying those sort of planting setups, and in terms of management in the school garden as well, rather than having the physical time and expense to set up raised beds to level things, I'm going to initially start growing things in containers, baleen crates, get a real nice microbiota in the soil there, and then when time and funds allow, then I can have more of a permanent setup. I'm going to kind of work like a sort of postage stamp, make something really nice here, a little bit more, little path, make something really nice here, get it all growing, get it all easy to maintain plants, things like green manures where you just keep the plant ticking over, where you can just harvest it, where you've got green waste on there, where you can actually educate the students, they can get involved, but they're not doing loads of digging and levelling and sawing up raised beds and things like that. I mean, that's nice to have that, and that's where the structure comes and the planning and the design. But I think if you could have even half the area, if you had sort of green manures, if you had soil feeding stations, if you have a way of dealing with organic matter on site, hugelkultur, things that you can lift up, get all the logs in there, get the worm casts in there, get the green manure on it, lasagna bed without all the expense of setting that up, get some real nice results just with as little expense as you can to get it set up. But yeah, I'll probably do some sketches just to show what's going on here, but you can see this is just like, Coke can, and then you've got Coke can worth of worm casts on a little container. That would be plenty. That's probably enough to keep it topped up right through maybe 6 months or something like that. But at the same time, you're adding more organic matter, and then that's the same planter is providing the fertility for keeping those plants going. And I really like the idea of growing these green manures and then root pruning as well. So you're just keeping that bit above, you're harvesting the green material, and a bit below you're harvesting the roots as well, but then you're keeping the kind of main sort of root zone of the plants alive, so you're not having to constantly buy seed and reseed, wait for those seeds to germinate and then propagate those plants. And so you've got a nice structure there already. It's a bit like maintaining a lawn, but you've got the kind of ability to lift up the lawn and then dispose your waste underneath and then drop that back down, so you've got that lovely nice nitrate that's feeding and keeping those plants working and growing really healthily. So yeah, I've got a few more of these to do. I might do a video, I'll have a quick look, see if it's interesting, and if it's see if there's something going on, I'll just do an update as well. But thanks for watching again.